Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. It's a great pleasure for the Autorité de la Concurrence to host this first ICN workshop on the role of competition in supporting sustainable development goals. Before I delve into substance, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the ICN chair, Andreas Mundt, and to the ICN steering group for giving us this outstanding opportunity. And I would also like to extend my thanks to the organizing team here at the Autorité who worked hard to make it happen today. I would like to wish a warm welcome to all the ICN members, both agencies and non-governmental advisors, and to all the viewers following our stream from all over the world. Your participation demonstrates the high level of interest of the international competition community in this important matter. So, why a sustainability workshop? Today's workshop is indeed historic. While the ICN has always touched upon the topic of sustainability in several occasions, it is the first time that an ICN event is fully dedicated to the issue. In this context, I believe that I should start by saying a few words on why we felt the need to further address this topic in the framework of the ICN. The obvious reason is that sustainable development represents both a major and a pressing challenge for our societies. The environmental transition impacts all sectors of the economy, cutting through all choices made by policymakers as well as national boundaries. Against this background, a growing emphasis has been placed on competition law and on the part played to support environmental and climate objectives. An increasing number of competition enforcers from every part of the planet are taking up the issues associated with sustainable development. Looking at it, there are indeed compelling reasons why we should care about sustainability. First, the competitive process is a source of innovation, quality and diversity of products and services, and efficient use of resources. Competition is therefore a necessary condition for the transition to succeed. Second, sustainable development can be integrated as a competition parameter through the traditional reasoning on diversity, quality, and innovation, and whenever consumers have a preference for sustainable products. At the same time, we should also accept that factoring sustainability considerations into competition is not self-evident and raises many questions on both competition policy and enforcement levels. This is why we thought that today was the right time to deepen the dialogue at international level and engage into multilateral exchanges with our peers as well as representatives from the private sector, to compare practices, identify common challenges, and discuss avenues for improvement, spanning from antitrust and merger control to advocacy and soft law initiatives. Upon joining the French Competition Authority, l'Autorité de la Concurrence, I made sustainability one of our 3 priorities as enshrined in our yearly review. This is not only a statement of intention, we want to make sure that it materializes across all dimensions of our action. Our first focus is, of course, antitrust. I have outlined repeatedly how the Autorité de la Concurrence is mindful of its intervention having 2 sides. Let's call them the stick and the carrot. On the one hand, we want to uncover and punish the anti-competitive practices that are the most harmful to sustainability, so that's the stick. On the other hand, our aim is to support companies that, in good faith, wish to pursue sustainable development objectives, and that's the carrot. On the first aspect, the Autorité now has a proven track record of taking account of sustainability as part of its competition analysis. The Autorité has fined infringers for specifically restricting competition in relation with the environmental qualities of the products at stake. The landmark case dates back to 2017, when companies in the floor covering sector were found to have formally agreed not to advertise on the environmental performance of their respective products. In 2021, the Autorité ruled on a case of collective boycott of a rival digital platform in the road haulage case, where obstructing environmental efficiency was held to be an aggravating circumstance. Even more recently, in December 2023, we fined undertakings and associations of undertakings in the canned food industry for conspiring to prevent manufacturers from competing on whether their food containers contained a chemical hazardous to human health by bisphenol A to the detriment of consumers. In the meantime, on a more procedural note, we've amended our notice on the calculation of fines in order to make it clear that the harm to environment may be taken into account when assessing the seriousness of anti-competitive practices. Now, while competition enforcement is key, the urgency of the ecological transition calls us to do more and make sure, when possible, that competition does not stand in the way of business projects with a sustainability objective. Such projects may include, for example, standardization agreements, joint production and distribution, information exchanges, joint purchases, or boycott of non-compliant suppliers. These practices usually ring alarm bells among competition enforcers. And indeed, there is a delicate balance to strike between, on the one hand, ensuring that the impact on sustainability is properly taken into account, and on the other hand, not allowing industry to greenwash anti-competitive practices. In this perspective, we started our own open door policy to support companies that wish to assess whether sustainability-related projects are competition compliant. To that end, following in the footsteps of other competition authorities, such as the Dutch ACM, the UK CMA, or the Japanese FTC, we've published in May 2024 a notice on informal guidance in the area of sustainability. Our first informal guidance letter regarding a common methodology to assess greenhouse gas emissions in animal nutrition was published this morning, and it can be found on our website. Alongside antitrust, merger control is another key area in which sustainable development can be factored in. The Autorité strives to adapt product market delimitations to the growing interest for sustainable products and services. For instance, in 2021, we took the view that the transport of refined petroleum products by pipeline and by lorry were not substitutable because of, inter alia, the greater environmental footprint of the latter. In the food distribution sector, the Autorité has identified a separate market for organic products. Reviewing efficiency defenses that include sustainability arguments remains a work in progress, and I very much hope that it will be discussed in the workshop today. Finally, the advisory function is also an occasion for the Autorité to analyze the interplay between competition rules and sustainability objectives. The green transition has indeed prompted the adoption of new regulations in various sectors. The French government regularly refers to as draft regulations that include interactions between sustainability and competition. We have provided recommendations on a wide range of sustainability-related issues, such as producer responsibility regarding used oils, climate risk insurance and reinsurance in agriculture, and the reorganization of the household packaging sector. This consultative role is also carried out on our own initiative through ex officio market studies, scanning new markets. The most recent examples include a study of November 2023 on land passenger transport and an opinion of June 2024 on the market for electric vehicle charging infrastructures. We are currently inquiring ex officio to analyze the competitive consequences of rating schemes, which provide consumers and with information on the sustainability-related characteristics of consumer products and services. We expect the opinion to be published before the end of this year. So let me conclude. Common goals call for common action. The climate transition will not succeed without joint action by policymakers, enforcers, and economic actors from all over the world. Your presence today acknowledges this commitment. I am therefore pleased to open today's workshop, which gathers highly qualified representatives of competition agencies and of the private sector, not forgetting the OECD. I would like to express my special thanks to all of them for their precious involvement. Today's discussion will be divided into two parts. The first panel will address the issue of sustainability considerations in competition law assessments and where competition agencies should draw the line in view of their mandate. The second panel will discuss how to effectively address behaviors that positively or negatively affect sustainability through advocacy ex-ante guidance and enforcement. Finally, Andreas Mundt, President of the Bundeskartellamt and ICN Chair, will do us the honor of providing the closing remarks. I'm very much looking forward to the debates, and without further ado, all that remains for me is to wish you a great workshop.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our audience. Please allow me to thank President Courret for his opening remarks and welcome you to the first panel on sustainability consideration in competition law assessments, competition agencies' mandate, and where to draw the line. Climate change, and more generally the need to adopt a more sustainable way of living, is arguably the most immense task of our times. Achieving net zero by 2050 seems like a goal that becomes more and more challenging with every day that passes. One cannot help but wonder what, if at all, is the role of competition policy and competition enforcement in this transition. This is one of these cases where the answer depends on the timing of the questions. If asked 10 years ago, the answer you would get from the mainstream competition expert, either an enforcer or a practitioner, would be, at best, a confused look. When we in the OECD did our first paper on the topic in 2019, we could find very little enforcement-related materials and had to base mostly on academia. But things have changed. In recent years, as we just heard from President Courret, more and more competition authorities have been taking active steps towards promoting sustainability goals. The arena, which is probably the most active and visible one, is the agreements one, where actions by authorities seek to clarify, mainly through guidelines and other means of soft law, when and how cooperation between firms, especially in cases where they compete with each other, are not likely to raise competitive concerns and hence not to bring about enforcement actions. Obviously, the questions around these type of guidelines are many, from both the practical side, but also from the legal and even the theoretical side. Additional steps are considered or even taken on mergers and maybe even abuse of dominance. These questions only deepen the question marks above future activity. Are competition authorities going too far, or perhaps not far enough? Should authorities adopt more ambitious involvement to support the sustainable development? Or should they go back to policymakers and seek guidance? To answer these timely and complicated questions, we have with us today a panel of 5, and please let me introduce them. Olivier Garçon, the Director General for Competition in the European Commission. Mick Keogh, Deputy Chair of the HCCC Australia. Hara Nikolopoulou, Vice President of the HCC Greece. Grant Murray, lawyer at Baker McKinsey, and here with us today is an MGA from the UK. And last but certainly not least, Nicole Rosenboom, competition economist at Auxera, an MGA from the Netherlands. We will start by hearing the speakers' opening remarks, and I would like to start with Olivier. You have the floor.
Very much, Ori. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, very good. So, by means of introduction, I'd like to say that, well, in Europe, we have what we call the Green Deal, which is a very ambitious and comprehensive plan and set of measures to make us carbon neutral by 2050, at the same time as increasing the competitiveness of our industry. And supporting the European Green Deal has been one of the objectives of the Commission policy under the current Commission mandate. Of course, the purpose of competition policy and competition enforcement is not to support the Green Deal, but we also think in the EU that competition policy doesn't operate in a vacuum. So while preserving the core mandate, so to make it short and with many caveats, but trying to enhance consumer welfare, we think that to the extent we can, we should contribute to other goals. And actually, having a cleaner environment and fighting global warming is not so far away from enhancing consumer welfare, depending on how narrow or how broad your definition of consumer welfare is. So the question we had to ask ourselves in Europe, meaning the Commission, but also the 27 colleagues in the 27 national competition authorities that together form with us the European Competition Network, was really, are our rules fit for purpose? Are our rules adapted to us trying to foster pro-competitive at the same time as pro-environmental agreements with efficiencies, producing efficiencies, but also how can we balance out some possible restriction of competition with environmental efficiencies? And it's a debate that kept us busy for almost 2 years. We dedicated several rounds of discussions at the level of heads of agencies, so Benoit, Andreas, all the other colleagues, and myself, before we agreed on new guidelines on horizontal cooperation that include, for the first time, a specific topic on green externalities. So these new guidelines have been adopted in 2023. And as I just said, has been done in very close cooperation with the various national competition authorities in the EU. Our aim here is really to provide legal certainty to companies that want to contribute to advancing sustainability goals together with their competitors. And in some cases, you have no choice. There's some things you cannot do but for if you team up together. And that may include some more or less severe restriction to competition. The guidelines review the various types of agreements. They include, of course, a number of examples of completely unproblematic agreements. They also provide easy to assess criteria for a safe harbor for sustainability standards. So for when no restriction is in principle meant to be restricted. And in the guidelines, we also make clear that genuine sustainability agreements will be assessed based on their effects and not be seen as restrictive competition by nature, what we call restrictive by object. And that is very important because this is what allows this balancing act between the positive and the negative effects. And finally, the guidelines provide guidance on the type of sustainability efficiencies that can be redeemed, that can redeem agreements, that restrict competition in the first place. So this guidance was long negotiated. We need to find the right equilibrium. It has been very much welcomed by stakeholders as a balanced approach, even if a number of other agencies have decided to go further and embrace a slightly more permissive approach. For me, the defining point here is in two very related issues. First, do you take into account in this balancing act, and how do you take it into account, so-called out-of-market efficiencies? So do you take into account environmental benefits that do not accrue to the same constituency of consumers than the one that suffer from the anti-competitive effects, or only partially? And if only partially, what is the measurement of the overlap that you need to have in order to be able to take it into account? And that links to the second issue on which there are discussions, which is the full compensation of consumers. Should we depart from the current standard in European law, which is that in order to be able to exempt an anti-competitive agreement, the benefits enjoyed by the consumers should fully compensate the restrictions of competition? Well, on this last point, I have to say, to me, it has always seemed to be a largely theoretical question, because what you are comparing usually is a relatively straightforward and short-term restriction of competition that is most of the time on prices, and therefore relatively measurable, and you compare it to longer term benefits that are of a more qualitative nature, like clean air, less carbon emission, and that are usually less measurable. So in that context, the concept of fully compensated is relative. What it means in reality is that it is compensated well enough, and that this is the judgment call taken by the authority that has to judge the validity of the agreement under the control of the judges. But of course, as the cases will come, we will, I'm sure, have to refine this approach. But the signal is important because we know that greening of our economy will need massive investments, and some of these investments will not be, the firms will not be able to carry them out alone. For some others, they will need, in order to bring it forward, to team up, and that may restrict their ability to compete with each other. And we need to be able to give a clear signal that we will carry a fair assessment of the pros and the cons in order to incentivize companies to come forward and disclose their projects so that we can work together with them in order to try to minimize the restrictions of competitions while keeping the same positive efficiencies. Maybe a word on two other topics very briefly. Mergers, some people say it's less relevant. Well, it is true that in mergers you do not, well, we do not in the EU have the possibility of making this balancing act contrary to antitrust. However, what we see is a number of mergers that also bring about positive green efficiencies. And we take into account these efficiencies just like we take into account any other efficiencies. And it's important in our decision eventually to clear the merger whenever there are restrictions of competition as well. Finally, we have just reviewed our market definition notice, and the new one was adopted on the 8th of February of this year. And in this notice, we identify sustainability as one of the non-price parameters of competition that the Commission may take into account when defining relevant markets. So here as well, we acknowledge the evolution of the practice and the fact that the world is moving in this respect. Thank you, Ori.
Thank you very much, Olivier. And let me now give the floor to Hara.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Ori, and thank you to the Autorité de Concurrence for this invitation and for organizing this this workshop on such an important and topical matter. We, of course, share the view that common goals require common action, and this is why we are trying and have indeed incorporated sustainability considerations into our law and practice. To the extent, of course, that we can, we believe that we must also contribute to goals of the Paris Agreement, the Green Deal, the UN goals on sustainable development, and our law has, I believe, been recently amended to take into account these extremely important goals. So the Hellenic Competition Commission has been doing two things. First of all, we have, I'd also like to say, before the horizontal guidelines were adopted, we amended our law to have the possibility to issue a non-action letter for sustainability reasons. This, of course, does not affect the self-assessment procedure by Regulation 1/2003 and our national law. But it means that companies can come to us with their plans and their agreement, set out all the documentation, the efficiencies, the effects, the compensation that they believe this agreement will bring about, and this will be examined by the Commission. And in case we find that this agreement supports a sustainability goal and does not have supports a sustainability goal, it may be cleared and we do not proceed with enforcement. In order to incentivize companies to come to us more with their with these agreements, we have created a sustainability sandbox. This is a supervised regulatory environment where companies can come in and test their agreements. It's the communication within this sandbox is between the Commission, a sustainability consultant, and the companies. And this sandbox can help not only for companies to test their agreements in terms of competition law, but to create imperfections in financial markets and regulatory uncertainties that sometimes especially small and medium-sized companies that wish to collaborate and to attract investment may not be able to do so by offering them a protected regulatory environment where they can propose and receive answers as to the compatibility of their proposals with a competition law assessment. These financial market imperfections and regulatory uncertainty issues may also be overcome. So in terms of supporting this common goal of sustainable development, we abide and we follow the horizontal guidelines issued by the Commission. We also have the ability to issue the non-action letter, and we welcome companies that want to test their plans in a sustainability sandbox. The main issue that we're facing right now is that we believe that we have set up the framework and the environment for companies to come to us so that we can actually see on a case by case how much of out of market efficiencies, for example, we want to take into consideration and how much of the compensation will be enough for an agreement to get clearance. We have not had the feedback that we expected from companies in order to see how this system actually works and what we need to make it work in an even better way. So this is what we have been doing in terms of this sustainable development. We have, of course, issued guidelines. We set the line, which is greenwashing, and a very careful examination of agreements that may have sustainability as just as a forefront. But we need to keep it to actually have a lot of enforcement cases to have a clear view as to how much this is helping and what we need to do to make it better.
Thank you very much, Haram. And we'll move now to Nicole.
Thank you. So let me give you some opening remarks from an economics perspective. So from that perspective, there can be several reasons why firms and competitors want to cooperate and where that cooperation can lead to environmental benefits. And examples that have been discussed in the debate around this topic so far are, for instance, and I'll give you three, the first mover disadvantage that causes firms to unilaterally not engage in green activities, but jointly they might. And in the EC guidelines from 2023, this has been accepted as part of the reasons under which an agreement could be considered indispensable. As a second one, other reasons why an agreement can be indispensable is, for instance, if there are high risks and or high costs that firms do not take on unilaterally, but could do so jointly. And we have seen examples in this in the carbon capture and storage sphere, where the ACM, the Dutch Competition Authority, has assessed the plans of the parties involved and provided a letter to those parties. And then third, one area that has had less attention in the debate so far is the role of positive spillovers between firms from their sustainability efforts. So where these spillovers exist between firms, efforts by one firm can also benefit another firm. And in this case, the level of sustainability efforts from other firms would actually have a positive effect on a firm achieving its own objectives. So allowing firms to coordinate their sustainability efforts will then lead to higher overall effort levels. And whether this, in fact, is in play for specific green agreements needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, because sector-specific and agreement-specific characteristics can impact the outcome of the assessment of the green agreement. Now, let me give you two examples of what might drive these positive sustainability spillovers between firms. So the first one is improved industry reputation. When an entire industry suffers from a poor reputation due to environmental damages resulting by its collective behavior, any one firm may face insufficient incentives to try to improve the industry image by investing a significant amount in sustainability. And in such cases, coordinating on improving sustainability can help to improve the overall industry reputation. And in turn, this overall industry reputation can have many benefits to all firms involved, including, of course, increased consumer demand, but also potentially better capital market access or increased ability to attract talent to the firms. And then the second example of the positive spillovers that may be in play is in the case of reduced existential threat. So a common assumption from an economic theory is that firms are profit-maximizing entities. And this impacts the incentives they have to invest in what is often more expensive green initiatives. So new technologies, new product lines, new packaging. But even with this profit maximization in mind, firms can still be expected to care about the existential threat that climate change poses, simply because any existential threat is bad for profit, for them and for their sector. So competition can lead to an overuse of scarce resources, particularly if firms are too focused on short-term profits and display so-called myopic behavior, which means they neglect the impact of current actions on profit from the future. However, the probability of actually abating the existential threat is not just a function of any one firm, but involves the behavior of many. And this again generates spillover effects that enable positive effects from coordination. To avoid free riding by firms that wish to benefit from the abatement costs of others without having to incur any cost, firms may want to coordinate their efforts. And as said, when any of the above examples, the examples I just gave, do in fact apply to a specific green agreement and indeed lead to benefits to society, needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And such an assessment, either by the firms or by the competition authority, often involves the quantification of environmental benefits. And as we've heard before, whether these outweigh any potential negative effect from the agreement, for instance, higher prices, and the fair share for consumers, or the way in which consumers are compensated for those increased prices. Here we can rely on the economics quantification toolkit that, depending on the type of environmental benefits, the type of agreements, and the product at play, and within the legal framework, can be applied to help in this balancing act.
Thank you very much. Nicole, we move now to Mick. Mick, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join the discussion today and offer a few thoughts about the transition to a sustainable economy and some challenges it raises for competition regulators. Competition regulators exist to support competition, to in turn drive efficient outcomes and avoid market failures. The key market failures we focus on is market power, and we do this for the benefit of consumers and businesses. Much of the world has enjoyed an extended period of economic growth since the Industrial Revolution. However, this growth has come at a very significant environmental cost, and this arises because of market failure, because of the failure to recognise and account for market externalities. The common thread here is markets and market failure. And so around the world, competition agencies are considering and debating the extent to which these challenging issues intersect with their mandate to promote competition and advance the interests of consumers. In some instances, regulators are being asked to make difficult judgments that may involve weighing up sustainability benefits against, for example, lower prices for consumers or improvements in services. When faced with such challenging issues, it's tempting to put our heads in the sand and focus only on our more traditional competition mandate. I don't think this is the right approach, and these are critical questions for us to be exploring for a number of reasons. The first reason is that we must consider these trade-offs because as society transitions, we recognise that there will be instances where exemptions to competition law are necessary. This is because collaboration between businesses can help address sustainability-related market failures by removing commercial disincentives or technical barriers that are stopping businesses from unilaterally taking action on sustainability. In Australia, we have an authorisation regime that allows us to grant exemptions to competition law if we form a view that a public benefit resulting from an agreement outweighs public detriment, which is typically harm to competition. We have a clear legal mandate to take sustainability benefits into account as part of this process, and there is no fair share requirement in Australia that the sustainability benefits must flow back proportionally to the impacted consumers. We have given sustainability benefits, including reduced greenhouse gas emissions, significant weight in past decisions. We expect the number of proposed sustainability collaborations that come through our authorisation system to increase, and the ACCC will need to consider new and challenging questions to properly scrutinise environmental benefits claimed and what they mean for consumers and how we should weigh them as part of our authorisation test. Examples of some of the complex questions that arise in the context of sustainability include: how do we reconcile that only some consumers, but not others, are likely to value sustainability in their purchasing decisions, despite the fact that the benefits of greater sustainability are experienced by all? What regard should we have to environmental science principles of inter- and intragenerational equity, which relate to notions of fairness and justice both between and within generations? In the context of sustainability, it is the consumers today that benefit from cheaper prices because a business has not paid to address environmental harm. However, the people that will ultimately face the cost of these actions may be people in different countries and indeed people in future generations not even alive today. And how do we quantify sustainability benefits and externalities that we are not used to valuing? It isn't only exemptions from competition law where competition and sustainability intersect. There is also a broader mandate that requires competition regulators to understand how markets will change as a result of sustainability drivers. We're going through a period of unprecedented economic change. New markets that financially value environmental protection are being created. Existing markets, such as energy markets, are being transformed, and there will also be industries that may be completely phased out. More broadly, nearly every large business in the global economy is now having to think about measuring, reporting, and reducing its environmental impact, and the ability to do so has implications for attracting investment, accessing overseas markets, obtaining finance and insurance, and winning green consumer demand. This very brief consideration of the challenges for competition regulators arising from the sustainability transition leads me to a single key conclusion. Competition regulators need to build expertise to understand these rapidly shifting market dynamics that flow from the transition to a sustainable economy. We need to extend beyond legal and economic skills and bring appropriate scientific knowledge to our decision-making processes. If we do this, we can help ensure that well-functioning, dynamic and competitive markets help drive the innovation and solutions that society needs to overcome environmental challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vic. And last but not least, let me give the floor to Grant.
All right. Well, it's really fascinating to hear all of these views and to hear from authorities who have obviously been really, really active in the area. As an NGA and someone who's been looking closely at what's happening around the world at a policy level, but also talking to companies about their frustrations and their ambitions, I thought I'd just share some of my observations about the journey that we've been on. I mean that for antitrust enforcers as well as the business community. And I think it is important to recognize that there is a journey here, and it's definitely not finished, because in listening to the agencies that are presenting here, I think, well, we're all in violent agreement about the need to do something and the ability to do something with competition policy without subverting, disabling the conventional aims of competition law in seeking consumer welfare. But that's not always been the case. I mean, even in Europe, not that long ago, there were voices that would say, well, actually, yes, we hear the desire for more sustainable outcomes and we hear an appetite for businesses to do more. But as an authority, the best way for us to help that is just to do business as usual. After all, competition law is about dynamism and it's about protecting innovation. If that's what consumers want, then they'll get it. So we will just carry on enforcing competition law. But things have changed. There's been real evolution over the last few years. So authorities have said, as we've heard the evidence of that, they no longer take the view, certainly in Europe and notable other agencies around the world, they no longer take the view that there's no need for some tailored guidance here. I think we've heard snippets of this in the introductory remarks, that there is now this recognition that yes, companies can do things on their own and should do it. Of course, competition individually, new sustainable brands, etc., is always going to be the first thing that a company is focused on. And then there is regulation for other matters, and there's no shortage of environmental regulation in Europe right now. But authorities have realized and recognized, acknowledged this gap in between unilateral acts and regulation, and recognize that peer collaboration, companies working together to address first mover disadvantage, to do things faster and on a scale that would otherwise not be possible, is right. There is this room, there is a gap that can be filled with private collaboration, but you don't need to disable competition law. You don't need outrageous, woke, unrecognizable safe harbors and concessions in order to do that. There's a way of using competition law and the existing tools in order to get there. And that's really important because businesses are trying to do more. I see that. They are moving out from really like ultra cautious spaces to wanting to do more because they are faced with so many pressures from 360-degree array of stakeholders. There's the financial community, there's the legislative and regulatory community, there's shareholder activists who are obviously bringing around more greener outcomes. There's consumers and there's employees. They're all contributing to a pressure that companies feel in order to do something. So that's where the collaboration is coming in. And competition authorities are facilitating that collaboration, as I say, without subverting competition law. So just kind of concretely, how are they doing it? Well, we've heard about the guidelines that are being produced, very often, really pragmatic. I think sometimes authorities, and I'm sure there's authorities listening who will be in this position, they won't really be comfortable in producing guidance on a particular area unless they already have a lot of experience, like a decade of experience of advising on that particular issue. But I think recognizing that this is quite tricky, it's controversial in areas, perhaps it should be, and there's an urgency. Authorities have moved and have begun to explain in a very helpful way and it's the agencies we've heard from, France, the Netherlands, the EU, the UK, Singapore, others. They've begun to explain what can be done without infringing the rules. And then many are now following up. And that's why I think we're on a journey where we've moved from an era, at least in Europe, I think, of policy and thinking and reflection to an era of action. And that action is actually putting pen to paper and providing guidance to companies that come forward, using the sandbox, using the open door policy that is offered by the Commission to a degree and by the CMA even more so, because companies will be protected from enforcement action if they follow the guidance or consult with the authority. So the agencies are following through and providing that informal guidance to companies that have projects. Very, very helpful. And actually, looking around the world, there's a lot out there now we did a survey and looked at the amount of collaborative agreements that are now being looked at. And there are many authorities, such as Germany, for example, Belgium, who have not produced guidance, but that has not prevented them from using all of their skills and their toolbox in order to provide guidance to companies on what is okay and what isn't. And the what is not okay is really important. And just because I come from a private practitioner background, I am not here to campaign for concessions or lenient treatment where it's not due. We applaud and call out the agencies such as the EU and France, others, for tackling green blocking arrangements, which is they're not sustainability arrangements. They're arrangements which are really about stabilizing competition and avoiding competition on sustainability as a parameter of competition. So absolutely, green conduct, which is cartels masquerading as sustainability agreements, need to be treated as cartels, quite rightly so. So I just want to say one thing, give it a spotlight on the UK, which is that the CMA produced guidance back in October, and it's extremely helpful. I think if authorities are interested in doing more in this area, then I'm going to call out the UK. The advice, the guidance rather, from October last year is concise, it's pragmatic. It is actually written for a legal but also a non-legal community, and I think already non-governmental organisations have been able to use this guidance to come forward. It sets out a whole list of very, very helpful guidance on what companies can do together in order to advance sustainability goals, including methodologies on target setting and frameworks for reporting on those. Be very careful to say what needs to continue to happen unilaterally. And I think what really shows that this is successful is that even within 6 months, we have seen 2 examples of arrangements, coalitions coming forward to the CMA and getting positive feedback on what they can do. So it's been, I think the proof is in the pudding, as we say there, that already it's been used and that pragmatism is coming out. I just, or if I can, just want to say one thing, because Monsieur Garçon did mention externalities and out-of-market benefits. And I think it is an important point. After all, any sustainability cooperation, any sustainability guidance that doesn't deal with externalities is going to have a limited effect on addressing arrangements which are seeking to address climate change. So it is important. Essentially, if you ignore externalities and out-of-market benefits, you are essentially, it's tantamount to ignoring Scope 3 emissions, which would not be good or logical. And there has been a technical debate, debate in Europe particularly, about whether the consumers, the constituents, as Monsieur Garçon mentioned, need to be fully or just fairly compensated. Fully compensated being more akin to a kind of polluter must benefit approach, I would say. But actually, what's really encouraging, I think, is to hear the pragmatic reality in the end, which is that in the end, you could be looking at very, very obvious environmental benefits, and therefore there is no place for a mathematical weighing. It can be done in a much more pragmatic way, and that is actually evident in one of the most recent UK guidance, where there was an ability to actually quantify the benefits of avoided greenhouse gas emissions and comparing that to potential increases in price. Well, it was clear that the benefits would outweigh the costs. So there is a way to do it. I don't think it's radical to say that producers and consumers have got no right to impose costs on others. And if you've got agreements between private companies that seek to address that in a balanced way, then that is something that authorities can take on. And in fact, the UK have done exactly that. So I'll finish there. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you very much to all of you. If I can maybe briefly summarize what we've heard so far, is that we heard from the enforcers, from Olivier, from Hara, from Mick, that they've been doing quite a lot on this front. And it seems that from Nicole and from Grant, we heard that there's a lot of need and support for everything that has happened so far. My next question will be more forward-looking. So basically, where are we in this process? A lot has been done, so maybe we should adopt a kind of a wait-and-see approach at this point, just consider the market's reaction, or should we already take additional steps looking forward? And to kick us off with this question, let me give the floor to Mick.
Thank you for the question. The ACCC, under its law, has had what we call a public benefits test associated with authorisations or exemptions from competition law, and also associated with consideration of mergers for quite some time. In fact, we've had roughly 180 matters over the last 5 or 6 years, and about a quarter of them have involved claims of sustainability benefits as part of the justification for the transaction or for the collaboration that might be occurring. So we actually have quite a long history of decision making that involves consideration and weighing of sustainability, and we actually have court decisions as well to provide guidance on that. So we haven't seen a great number of businesses come to us very specifically on sustainability issues and seeking exemptions or authorisations. But we will be issuing some guidance later this year. And in fact, when we look at, as I said, at a portfolio, there's already considerable precedent and past decisions there that involve the weighing of those considerations. So we certainly have reached out in terms of issuing guidance and engaging on new guidance, but our exemption process does and has in the past for quite some time allowed us to consider these issues. So I'm not sure we'll be going more proactive than that at this stage.
Grant, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So I think if the question, Ori, is like, should we now sit and wait and see what happens? I would say no. I'd say like keep up the momentum. There's a lot of great work that's already happening. And I've just been to a music festival, so maybe that's why I think of Freddie Mercury, Don't Stop Me Now. That's what we need to channel, and maybe avoid 200 degrees, Mr. Fahrenheit. That wouldn't be good, but certainly we're on the right trajectory. This is the journey, and continue. And so with what momentum do I mean? I think globally, so geographically, continue. Like there's great precedents out there. There's a great amount of consensus on this call. As I said, it's not always been straightforward. I think these discussions about what can be done without subversion, without making it look as if competition law has been weakened, are really important. But even if we do get wonderful national guidance around the world, then there is still this risk, I think, of a patchwork approach. And that, of course, like everything, interferes with and reduces legal certainty. And it's going to mean that there are less chance of the really sort of game-changing, really important, larger sustainability cooperation agreements coming forward. There are going to be major blind spots as well, to the extent that we have regions, authorities that are not vocal on this, even saying what is okay, what is really not restrictive of competition is a problem. And I personally don't think it's a coincidence that of the agreements and wonderful things that we've seen being cleared, that have been put in front of competition authorities around the world for guidance, they have not touched on the US. There hasn't been a US nexus as far as I can see. And I think even if you have a European-wide arrangement, then you couldn't really be sure that there wouldn't be some US nexus there. So I think that continuing the debate and widening the debate, I think encouraging international organizations like OECD, ICN to think about what can be done in terms of this area is really, really important. And then I would just say a word on like the keeping the momentum up technically. So I don't think there's a need to change the law. I think that it's a case of just applying the law properly, I think that some of the guidance, I've already touched on it, in the EU and the UK is extremely helpful, because there has been this really helpful elaboration of the kind of conduct that is horizontal, but should benefit from a rule of reason effects analysis. It shouldn't be characterized as a cartel. So in the EU and the UK, that includes, we heard, I think Olivia referred to sustainability standards, fine. But there's also this more, I think, more helpful areas, which is where the guidance explains that in the UK, for example, joint agreements to collectively withdraw products that are harmful to the market, or agreements where companies agree to buy only from suppliers with a particular, sustainability footprint, environmental footprint, that these would not be treated as collective boycotts. Very, very helpful. So I think just having guidance which looks forward, which provides clarity on what will be a rule of reason as opposed to cartel conduct is extremely helpful. And then I think that the open door policy is what we've heard about that a bit already, but that's extremely helpful to businesses, be able to come in, not to have all the facts at your fingertips. We can see from the most recent UK informal guidance that there was a lot of uncertainty in certain places, but that did not prevent the organisation coming in and seeking guidance, and it did not prevent the CMA from actually giving it a very, very helpful steer. So that open door policy on the back of guidance is really just, I think, the way to keep going.
Thank you very much, Grant. So Hara, should we adopt a wait and see approach, or should we follow Freddie Mercury's advice?
Well, I very much agree with what has been said. I think that the basic point is we need to keep on promoting our position that we as competition agencies, we are part of this discussion. We are not going about business as usual with the same standards and with the same approach, because we have incorporated sustainability in our assessments. That this is something that we all need to do, and we are going to play our part to the extent, of course, that we can. We have actually tried to promote sustainability as part of our advocacy efforts. So we also have a guidance on farmers' collaboration, which has a lot to do with sustainability. We also have a sector inquiry on waste management, which of course has a lot to do with sustainability. So we are trying through other ways, through advocacy efforts and through sector inquiries, to promote our position that we are part of this discussion. And I think that a very important part of this, it has already been said, is keep on discussing the issue in fora such as today. That's why this workshop today is so important, because it keeps the discussion going on, and it helps us have an approach which is, to the extent possible, harmonized, because when we do not have, I think it was Grant that said, patchwork of approaches, when we have a similar approach, then that increases incentives for companies to come forward with agreements that may not be just national but supranational in their effects, and it will increase their legal certainty that they will have a similar approach in various jurisdictions. So two things. Enforcement is one part, of course, but we should continue to put ourselves on the map of this discussion, and we should make this discussion an international one, a prominent international one. And in this way, I think that we can wait for the market to react, but we can incentivize it to react.
Thank you, Ara. Olivier, what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, several considerations maybe. We so far we have had no case. Although the Commissioner, Mrs. Vestager, publicized this new approach already in 2020, we have had several discussions for large international alliances which that echoes a point that Grant was making, have been dropped because of fear of not getting antitrust exemption in other jurisdictions. Well, I think we would have been prepared to grant it. Secondly, it seems that what we have at the moment in Europe is more local or strictly national types of cooperation. I mean, the colleagues in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Greece have a few cases, but they all are restricted to the member states or actually a part of that member state, which is maybe not so surprising. So at the one hand, we have large international cooperation, but then because of the lack of homogeneity at international level with the way how to approach these issues do not necessarily go through. And at the other end, we have more local or infranational cooperations. But more generally, I have to say, I said it in my introduction, most pro-environmental agreements do not entail any restriction of competition. And I must say that I am still to see the first case where there is a genuine restriction of competition with a real potential impact on the ground. Not some kind of lawyer elaborations of what could be a restriction of the freedom of behavior, but a real restriction of competition with a real potential economic impact on the ground that would be really indispensable to attain really tangible and measurable beneficial effects. I don't rule out that such a case exists, but I've never seen one. That's the only thing I can say. So I'm not sure what to do. I mean, we have numerous cases promoted that companies can come in confidence and disclose, and it will not be held against them. They know what is our standard because we have published the guidelines. And we're still faced with the situation that I just described. And I'm not sure lowering the standards, for example, would be the right way forward. Certainly not as long as we do not have more practical experience. The last consideration is that our policy vis-a-vis greening of the economy, let's call it that way, or decarbonization of the economy, walks on two legs. I mean, on the one hand, we are willing to favor agreements that are beneficial, as I just explained. On the other hand, what you see is more and more anti-competitive practices that are actually in that field. Cartels, because of course, firms have already detected that it may be easier, less detectable, and just as effective to collude, not to roll out new technologies that are very costly in order to combat climate change or lower emissions than simply colluding on prices. And that was very much what was at the core of our German emission cartel between German car makers in 2021, where there was a collusion in order to delay the rollout of efficient technologies for emission cleaning for diesel cars. But this year, we have issued a statement of objection to a company producing and selling electricity in Greece for a suspected abuse of dominant position between 2013 and 2019. And what was the alleged abuse is that the company has sold electricity generated via thermal plants, essentially lignite, so very carbon emitting, at prices that were below viable costs, such making it uneconomical to produce or actually deploy windmills and solar panel farms. So, and this is really extremely detrimental to the decarbonization of the economy. And finally, we continue to investigate a string of cartels in that field, in particular one that concerns the recycling of end-of-life vehicles, which all manufacturers of cars present in Europe are involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Nicole?
Yes, thank you. I really liked what Grant said about the journey, because indeed this debate has been going on for 2 or 3 years now, I think. And as a private practitioner, initially at the start of that period, the hesitation was that it is so intangible. So there are environmental benefits, there may be a price increase. How do you weigh those against each other if one of them is in monetary terms and one of them is in cleaner air or less water or higher recycle rates or anything like that? How do you weigh that if you can't quantify that properly? I think that sort of black box characteristics of the debate has been reduced significantly and to the benefit, and with a lot of thanks to the guidance that has been put out by competition authorities. I think that really helped a lot in the debate. So initiatives such as the technical paper that has been commissioned by the Hellenic Competition Authority and the Dutch Competition Authority together is very helpful. The guidelines for the different member states and other countries outside Europe are very helpful in that regard. I would also applaud the breakdown of the 3 different types of benefits in the EC guidelines. So the individual use benefits, individual non-use benefits, and the collective benefits. I think those are very helpful. How we have those now, and it gets more tangible for firms how to quantify it and their advisors. I think there's still room for improvement, and I fully appreciate that room for improvement is depending on actual cases coming forward and authorities and firms and their advisors also learning in that sense. And also reflecting on what Olivier just said about more practical experience. I think we can still give more guidance in practical terms of how to use the economic toolkit, how to use the quantification toolkit. And this also goes to the point of out-of-market efficiencies, and in which situations and to what extent this can be taken into consideration. And then as a last point, indeed, I can echo fully what my former, what the panel members before me have said about the international patchwork. I would have loved to see more international firms coming forward and asking for clearance or asking in the open door policy whether their proposed agreement is okay or in line with competition law. I do worry that international firms may not do that or may not go through with their initiative globally because out of fear of some jurisdictions that are less far advanced in the journey is maybe the best way to put it. And that also means that a firm has to decide, am I going to do this locally in those countries where it is allowed, knowing that I won't reap all benefits to the environment I can reap, or am I just going to hold off and do nothing or something else in the local area? And I think that's a lost opportunity for those companies, but also for consumers living in the different areas around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to the next question, and if I may ask you to keep it concise, we are a bit running out of time. So please keep your answers short on this one. So some of you have already mentioned the issue of efficiency measurement as potentially an obstacle, but at least a challenge that authorities need to face, and also private sector need to face when trying to assess the competitive harms against the sustainability on the environment type of agreements. And my question here is, do you think that we have a good enough methodology to measure efficiencies? And Nicole, let me go immediately back to you.
Thank you. I think in a very short way, yes. I think we do have the economic toolkit to quantify environmental effects and the implications for different groups, so that is consumers and out-of-market efficiencies. I think it depends mostly on the legal framework that is at play in a given jurisdiction, whether or not you can weigh those out-of-market efficiencies into the balancing act. And you can imagine that whether or not you do so can have quite an impact on the outcome of that balancing act. So I really like the difference between what I've heard today from Australia, but also what I know from the UK system in the context of the climate change agreements, so the CCAs, where if the agreement leads to a lower CO2 emissions, the UK can take into account the benefits to all UK consumers and not only the consumers of the products. And depending on the product in question, you can imagine that may tip the balance compared to a situation where only the consumers are at play. Now, when it comes to the different methods of quantifying environmental harm, there are several. And my take would be that the method can be chosen depending on what type of environmental benefits you need to measure or is at play for the agreement, and not so much the legal framework or the way that market or out-of-market efficiencies are considered. I think every method can be applied irrespective of that framework. And then what comes out of that method, when you apply it to the case at hand, you either take the totality of the environmental benefits, if that's allowed under the legal framework, or you take only the pro-rata part that belongs to the consumers. And there are two broad different methods. That is the sort of the social cost method, so the damage cost method or the abatement cost methods, where we can rely on shadow pricing for emissions, which quantify, as the name already suggests, the benefits for society, which then is sort of the 100% bit, which needs to be carved out for the consumers. Or if you go to another type of methods, which is more the private value, for instance, a higher recyclability rate or lower electricity use or anything like that, and you can tailor that to the consumers of the product itself, then that can be used in jurisdiction where the out-of-market efficiencies are not allowed, or it can be used in a jurisdiction where they are allowed, and then you need to pro rata increase the benefits to get to the 100% of society. So irrespective of the legal framework on this matter, you can use the wide range of economic tools to quantify the effects and potentially break it down to consumers and out-of-market efficiencies.
Thank you very much. Olivier?
I'm not so sure I could be as positive as Nicole is. But sure, you can quantify positive externalities when it comes. Take carbon emission, because it's in a way the most simple in that respect. Because if you move to biodiversity or recycling, certainly biodiversity it's much more complicated, and the methodology is not so clear. But that's not really my point. So my point is more than the characteristic of these efficiencies we're talking about is that they are externalities. In other words, they cannot be appropriated by the firm individually. And that is a very big difference with the way we treat efficiencies normally, because an efficiency, think about merger control, for example. Well, an efficiency are gains in efficiencies that will make it that although the merged entity will gain some market power, the efficiency will lead it to set its price or fix its quantities in a way that it will profit maximize, but at a lower price because of the efficiencies or at higher output. That's not the type of efficiencies we have here. And I think we shouldn't do as if it were, because it's not. We have efficiencies here that are real, well, assume they're real, but they do not impact the cost curve of the firm. And for that reason, basically, the balancing act is a different one, and that is why the question of out-of-market and compensation of the consumer becomes important, because you cannot deal with these efficiencies the same way as you would do in a merger context. That's also why the question of how do you take a pro-environmental stance in merger control is a more complex one. I think this is something that is really important to keep in mind. The nature of these efficiencies is different. They're essentially positive externalities. And that makes it more complicated. And that makes it, in my view, still important to care about the compensation of in-market consumers. But keeping in mind that what we're talking about, because of the nature of these efficiencies, are collective goods. So what I mean, non-exclusive consumption goods, like the sun. Well, the fact that I benefit from the rays of the sun doesn't take out anything from my neighbor, because it's just benefit just as well. So, and lowering of carbon emission is of the same nature. So I'm not sure it's so sound to try to apportion it to some consistency, because there is no apportionment to be doing, because we all benefit equally. And actually, if you want to push it further, we all benefit equally from a reduction of emissions, say, in China or in India. We benefit in Europe just equally. Everybody benefits actually. Does that mean anything about how we can make the balancing act? Well, I'm not sure. So for as much as I think this is something we have to do, I think I would slightly disagree with Nicole that it is so straightforward.
Thank you, Olivier. Grant, where do you stand on this?
Well, I think, first of all, maybe take a step back, because your question was about efficiencies, which sounds quite narrow, but the law, at least in the EU and the UK, is really about benefits, which is broader. So it can be, in the environmental context, we can be talking about improvements to the process, quality, more innovation, cleaner processes, other ways in which that we see economic progress. So it is wider. And I think that certainly there's complexity here, but the way that the horizontal guidelines at EU level and the UK as well map out that methodology of direct consumer benefits, indirect and collective is really a good roadmap, I think. Other agencies that are trying to tackle this area, I think, will find that interesting. So, there's qualitative benefits here. And I point to the UK informal guidance. This is the first one from November last year, where, in fact, the authority was not too worried about restrictive effects, but acknowledged that the arrangement would actually result in more choice for consumers. So, qualitative benefits should not be overlooked. We shouldn't take a very narrow view and only talk about the quantitative efficiencies. And when it comes to those qualitative things, competition authorities have got vast amounts of experience in checking the veracity of what producers say, and also bringing in experts to help if they need some assistance with that verification. So that's the first point. Yes, on quantitative, it's been a drawn-out debate here about out-of-market efficiencies. There are challenges, but again, the UK guidance, I think, puts forward a pragmatic approach. It is going to be much easier to quantify effects if you can look out of market. Now, of course, the fact that it's expedient to do so doesn't mean that that's why it should happen. But I already talked in my opening remarks about why I don't think it's radical to say that producers and consumers do not have a right to impose costs on others. And if there are arrangements that seek to address those externalities, then they should be looked at. And Olivier talked about pragmatism in his opening remarks. I think that's where it comes out on the really the really big picture stuff of climate change. Again, the UK was not able to really quantify the restrictive effects. It couldn't be assured that there were not any because of the the lack of specific information that was available. But because it was able to look at the carbon abatement values using UK government guidance, it could actually put a number on expected benefits. And so when you do that kind of assessment, I think that is one that other agencies can follow. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Grant. And Hara, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think that indeed there is an economic toolkit in place. In the technical report that we published together with our Dutch colleagues, there is a range of methods that can be used for environmental evaluation. So we have methods based on market choices, on hypothetical choices, on evaluation derived from stated policy objectives or from existing studies and databases. I think this technical report is quite detailed on the toolkit that's available to actually quantify effects. However, I'm not quite sure that we do have a solid methodology in place right now. And I think that part of this is because we do not have a big cases to actually test these valuations and how we can quantify effects. So I think that a lot of it's something that we can do, and the tools are there, but it's definitely something that we need to build on, and I don't think it's at this point solid enough to be able to be applied with some legal certainty. So as cases grow, the way we're using a toolkit will also grow. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. And Mick, over to you.
Thanks. And our consideration of these issues is guided by our law, which has what's called a public benefits test. So that the law says we have to consider the claimed public benefits and weigh them against the detriments, which can include detriments to competition, and often does. And our courts have said that it's not an arithmetic or an accounting exercise, that it's a method, a matter of arguing logic and consideration and bringing the factors to bear in the weight of arguments. So we have some precedent now going back quite a few years of that approach. So it's a pragmatic approach. Yes, it doesn't bring the same level of legal certainty, but on the other hand, it doesn't mean the consideration is constricted by models or methodologies that aren't appropriate to particular situations. So in some respects, that precedent that we have in front of us leads us to adopt that more pragmatic and broadly consideration of potential benefits, potential harms, including harms to competition, and weighing that. So we don't go down the quantification path as such.
Thank you very, very much. If I can quickly wrap up, it seems that there's a consensus regarding the importance and the significance of the steps that have already taken place. And there's also an agreement on the need to take further steps, but this is where things get maybe a bit more complicated and more diverse. Only to underscore the importance of this initiative taken by the ICN. Let me thank the ICN for this initiative and for the invitation, and also to its chair, Andreas Munt, and of course to the Autorité for organizing this event. Thank you very much. And with that, let me give the floor to the moderator of the next panel, Andrea Marvan, Chair of COFECE. Thank you.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to our panel on how to effectively address behaviors that can positively or negatively affect sustainability through advocacy, ex-ante guidance, and the suitability of traditional enforcement tools in these topics. First, I would like to congratulate the Front Autorité for organizing this very important workshop, and also acknowledging the ICN for continuing to tackle issues that are key within the competition community. As we all know, there has been an ongoing and expanding discussion of the intersection between competition policy and environmental sustainability. This, of course, reflects the growing recognition of the need to align market dynamics with ecological objectives. We are in the face of unprecedented environmental changes. It is clear that us, competition agencies, have to play our role in promoting sustainability and sustainable practices, while at the same time ensuring fair and competitive markets. As competition agencies are trying to grapple all of these issues, there is an ongoing debate on how to address and balance competition objectives with sustainability goals. In that regard, there are many jurisdictions who have already taken steps. Some of them we already heard in the first panel, and in different approaches. First of all, most jurisdictions or many jurisdictions have issued guidelines on how to apply competition law to sustainability agreements, and others are working on aligning their competition policies with environmental objectives. There's also agencies who have already undertaken merger analysis, and while analyzing a merger to understand the effects of sustainability and the benefits that those could have come in comparison to the possible risks of competition. It's also, it seems intuitive that competitive markets have long shown its capacity to foster businesses to innovate and set themselves apart from others. In that regard, there is a growing demand for products from consumers. Consumers are now given importance to products that minimize their ecological footprint. And so companies are also trying to win consumer preference by incorporating sustainability factors. And that, to me, is competition at its finest. In COFECE, one of our main objectives when thinking about competition and other emerging issues such as sustainability, we want to join efforts with other jurisdictions and recognize the link between competition and sustainability, which will be a key area in our future. Currently in COFECE, we are working in a document which we hope it will be published this year, which explores the relationship between competition and sustainability. This is our first step. What we did is we embarked in a survey to be answered by consumers, by companies, by the civil society, by governments, to understand what is the relationship between competition and sustainability within the Mexican context. Our goal is to understand how sustainable practices can impact both supply and demand, and to hear from concerns from all of the stakeholders in these markets. Recently, I was appointed vice chair of the ICN for emerging competition issues. I firmly believe that sustainability should be one of the areas in which these efforts of the ICN should focus. We have to learn from the experiences of other jurisdictions, their lessons, and what they have done, and the steps they have taken to tackle these issues. So undoubtedly, workshops like the one that we are living today, or we are having today, give jurisdictions an invaluable opportunity to share experiences, build capacities, and implement best practices across all countries that form part of the ICN. I am confident that this workshop will be crucial in diversifying the ICN's work agenda and fostering meaningful discussions to find comprehensive solutions. Today, we have an amazing panel of experts. First of all, we have Commissioner Reiko Aoki from the Japan Fair Trade Commission. We also have Patrick Krauskopf, who is a partner at Agon Legal Partners from Switzerland. We have Nuno Cunha Rodriguez, who's the president of the Portugal's Autorité de Concurrence. We have Fabrizio Cardim de Almeida, who is a partner at Melo Torres from Brazil. And we have Elisabetta Iosa, who's commissioner from the Italian Competition Authority. Thank you very much to all of you for your participation today. I am really looking forward to hearing from your experiences. And we will start with the first round of opening remarks, which will be 5 minutes each. I remind you all, I think we're already running a little bit late of time, so I would kindly ask you to keep to those minutes. And for this round, we will begin with Commissioner Aoki from Japan. Reiko, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. And I also like to join you in thanking the Autorité de Concurrence and the ICN for organizing this workshop on something that requires global and immediate action. And I'd like to share with you 3 initiatives by the JFTC to complement or support the realization of the Green Society effort. The first initiative is the Green Guidelines. Climate change is a pressing issue for all countries, as been mentioned before in this workshop, irrespective of the stage of economic development. Green transformation are initiatives to address climate change and strives to achieve both reduction of environmental burdens and economic growth. We believe promoting competition in the relevant markets, along with regulation, is essential for successful green transformation. Competition assists with efficient resource allocation and provides incentives to innovate. To this end, JFTC has resorted to various advocacy tools, such as publication of green guidelines. Guidelines makes clear JFTC's reasoning when applying the Anti-Monopoly Act, improving transparency and predictability for businesses engaged in green transformation. Specifically, the JFTC published the Green Guidelines in March 2023, which was, to the best of my knowledge, the first of its kind. In the guidelines, the JFTC made clear to businesses, relevant ministries, and consumers that green transformation initiatives do not reach competition law as long as they do not restrict competition by, for instance, by creating new technologies. After the publication, based on dialogue with businesses and one prior consultation case, which I'll talk about in a minute, the JFTC revised the guidelines in April 2024 to accommodate speedy implementation of the green initiatives. The Green Guidelines covers not only joint activities, but vertical restraints and mergers, providing a one-stop reference to businesses. The guidelines include 86 hypothetical cases to make the important points easily understood by the businesses. Second initiative is prior consultation. Prior consultation refers to confidential consultations businesses can engage with the JFTC should they have any competition law concerns with actions they're taking or contemplating taking. You could say it is our version of the open door policy, which also has been mentioned by several enforcers. The JFTC has expanded the unit dedicated to prior consultation and set up a contact point specifically for green initiative consultations. With this framework, the JFTC has provided a guide on how to proceed with green initiatives and have published the outlines of the consultation cases after appropriate measures to preserve confidentiality for public reference. A prior consultation from a petrochemical complex is one example. The JFTC made public the outlines of the case to make clear that even conduct that includes sensitive information exchange, in this case, which were critical for a green initiative, will pose no problem under the Japanese Anti-Monopoly Act. Third initiative is market studies. The JFTC has been conducting market studies on markets relevant for reducing environmental burdens of climate change. 1, electric vehicles, EV-related markets, and 2, recycling services of used plastic bottles. The JFTC published the market study report regarding EV charging services twice, July 2023 and May 2024. JFTC felt it necessary to publish in such short succession because the market environment of EV charging service, as well as the governmental regulations associated with them, were evolving quickly and dramatically. For this kind of market, the best time to publish a complete and comprehensive market study may never arrive. Accordingly, the JFTC gave recommendations once the competition concerns were identified, even before the details of the whole market became evident. This agile approach led to 2 reports within 1 year. The JFTC also published a report of market study regarding the recycling service of used plastic bottles with a very similar background with respect to market and regulation. The reports have demonstrated that promoting competition for efficient use of resources and fostering innovation is crucial for reducing environmental burden of climate change. Furthermore, by taking into account so-called greenwashing, made clear that the JFTC puts priority on appropriate enforcement by traditional tools, even with green initiatives. In conclusion, I think these examples demonstrate that JFTC has succeeded in shaking off the belief that competition law prohibits any form of horizontal collaborations, including those necessary to achieve zero carbon emissions, and that the JFTC has fostered public understanding that competition is not a barrier to green transformation, but that in fact competition law supports the initiative. Green transformation is still in its early phase. JFTC needs to continually review the green guidelines in step with evolving environment and concerns. JFTC is aware that it needs to keep abreast of new cases by encouraging the use of prior consultation system. Our engagement is particularly important since many businesses seem to be intimidated by the JFTC. JFTC also is scanning the market and be ready to compile more market studies in a timely manner. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Aoki. Now for the next opening remark, we have Patrick Kaskov, who's a partner at Agon Legal Partners from Switzerland. Patrick, please.
Yeah, dear Chairwoman, chers amis de l'Autorité de la Concurrence, thank you very much for organizing this workshop. First of all, as a former chairman, vice chairman of the Swiss Competition Agency, I will welcome that the Swiss Competition Agency has put together a committee dealing with topics we are about to discuss today. And just give me a short overview on what's ongoing in Switzerland. First of all, our Competition Act is applicable as everywhere else to any agreement, competition agreements, which have a positive ecological effect. And in Switzerland, as many jurisdictions know, we have a exhaustive list of efficiency reasons. But this list and the wording is formulated quite openly. So the wording would give enough room for sustainability consideration, but the topic or the word sustainability is not explicitly mentioned in our code. However, a case law indicates in Switzerland that environmental considerations may fall within the scope of justification under the just presented efficiency grounds listed in our current law. So, and the one thing which is, the one efficiency reasons which can be used or is being used by the Swiss Competition Agency in its case law, it's a broad interpretation of the wording rational use of resources. And indeed, our government, when putting together the materials presented by the Swiss Parliament, said and stated that environmental protection reasons, such energy consumption or disposal problems, might be a ground of justification. But they always have to prove, and the previous workshop showed it, you always seek to show a positive impact, immediate impact being realized by the stakeholders within a certain lapse of time. And even our Supreme Court in Switzerland has stated that public goods and natural resources could also, under certain circumstances, fall under the concept of resources, a rational use of resources mentioned in the law. And even the improving of products leading to positive environmental compatibility of products could also fall within the scope of justification. And COMCO itself, the Swiss Competition Agency, has also mentioned in several cases that in general they could imagine that sustainability environment arguments could constitute an efficiency ground. However, and this is, I guess, the problem now, as a professor at the university, teaching my students, and as a lawyer today, it's quite difficult to give advice to companies, because still we don't have any provision in our law, and still we are missing a little bit of clear guidelines. And so we have for the private sector still uncertainties which remains, and so this. And the reason is basically, if you enter into a cooperation agreement with your main competitor or other competitors, this could lead to sanctions. And this may prevent just this uncertainty, basically prevents companies of even thinking sometimes about possible sustainability cooperation. And so in Switzerland, as in Germany, we have the possibility of asking the government, the Minister of Economic Affairs, to say yes, for public interest reasons, we are asking you to authorize a certain behavior. But this is only possible if previously the competition agency has issued a decision of forbidding and even sanctioning the companies. So as a company in the private sector, you are fearing this outcome. First you're engaging in something you think which this could benefit the environment. However, COMCO might see this in another way, so you're getting a fine, and going afterwards, after 3, 4, 5 years of investigating, asking the Swiss government for an extraordinary permission of this cooperation is still too risky. So. And let me just make a comparison between environmental protection laws on the one hand side and competition law. And usually in Switzerland, at least, environmental protection laws, they just put a minimum standards being which companies have to follow. And in an ideal world, what would we like to have? That the private sector companies' undertakings could go beyond this legal minimum standards putting in place, even perhaps by thinking about self-regulations. But again, if companies would like to enter into cooperation among competitors, they would have to overcome certain challenges jointly. And then one of the challenges, you know, you have to show in front of the competition agency that together with your business partners that your cooperation is meeting certain criteria of sustainability, and those they have to outweigh the anti-competitive effects of what you are doing. So in the end, and I will stick to my 5 minutes, competition law can play and should play a complementary role to a traditional environmental protection law, and especially in promoting sustainability cooperation agreements and not hindering companies to enter into sustainability cooperation. And so I guess we have to be a little bit careful. And perhaps in Switzerland, at least, the COMCO could give fill the term of sustainability or the efficiency use of resources, give a little bit of guidelines, and I guess everybody would benefit on this, because our economy at the very end relies on a functioning ecosystem and intact natural resources. If we are losing our ecosystem and if we are destroying our natural resources, I guess everybody would be pretty much, this would harm pretty much everybody. So in a summary, yes, competition law should play a role in promoting sustainability. However, the question is how to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. I think that is the key question, and I'm glad that we're gathered here. I hope we can collect some ideas on how to tackle that. Next, for the opening remarks, we have President Nuno Cunha from the ADC Portugal. Nuno, please.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you to the French Competition Authority and the ICN for the invitation and for the opportunity to share the views of the ADC on how to use competition policy to help fostering sustainability. The transition to a sustainable economy has undoubtedly one of the fundamental challenges facing our society. Achieving this challenge successfully and in a lasting way involves a multitude of initiatives and instruments. In most cases, competition policy is likely not the appropriate tool to address these challenges. However, it can play a complementary and relevant role. This involves, for instance, advocating for pro-competitive public policies. And after all, ensuring that green public policies are competition-friendly can be key to achieve a transition to a sustainable economy in the most cost-efficient and innovative way. It also implies helping firms to avoid infringing competition law rules when establishing agreements with sustainability purposes, as well as providing information on exemptions, safeguards, and capabilities. So this is precisely what the ADC has done in its best practices guide on sustainability agreements that went through the public consultation process and received contributions from the government, consumer, and business associations, as well as the antitrust community. This guide is aimed at raising awareness of companies with a less complex language. It also provides examples and cases to which companies can relate to. It is also consistent with the various European Commission guidelines, such as the guidelines on horizontal agreements. And this is, in our perspective, important, given that we do not aim to substitute those guidelines, but rather to advocate for their use and raise awareness. If we move to slide 2, we can see that the guide is structured to help companies determine whether the agreement is compatible with competition law. In order to provide a clearer picture of the process and simplify some of the complexity inherent to this exercise, we start the guide with this flowchart. Then, throughout the guide, we follow the structure of the flowchart and its key questions. First, the guide explains when sustainability agreements are clearly not covered by competition law and provides examples. Second, it explains when sustainability agreements may breach competition law and refers to decisional practices of the Commission and Member States. Third, the guide goes through each of the exemptions, safeguards, and conditions for an efficiency assessment with detailed but simplified explanation supported in examples. We finish the guide with a checklist aimed at being a helpful list of assessments that companies should carry out to check if their agreements comply with competition law or can be exempted or excluded from the application of competition law. The idea of the checklist, we have another one in consortia and in public tenders, and the flowchart is helping firms in their self-assessment of their agreements. Now moving to slide 3. Our aim with the best practice guide is to raise awareness of companies to better understand what can be done in terms of coordination involving sustainability goals. This was also our approach when we issued 2 opinions concerning governmental proposals for strategic plans, namely regarding first, non-urban waste, and secondly, circular economy. In both documents, the ADC raised awareness to the Commission guidelines on horizontal agreements when voluntary agreements between competitors are envisaged, as it was the case in both strategic plans. After all, we do not want to be in a way of cooperation amongst firms that can truly make a difference for achieving a sustainable economy. But we also want to make sure that horizontal agreements do not significantly harm consumers, for example, through greenwashing cartels. So the interaction between sustainability and competition is not limited to sustainability agreements. The ADC has also been active in ensuring competition in newer markets that involve green products. An example is our recent market study on competition in the electric vehicle recharging sector. In fact, transport is the sector that contributes the most to greenhouse gas emissions in the EU, which is why electric vehicles have been identified as one of the key technologies for decarbonizing the economy. Ensuring an innovative, dense, competitive, and efficient network will likely boost demand for electric vehicles and help replacing non-renewable energy sources. Thus, the ADC put forward in a public consultation a set of recommendations that aim at promoting competition in this market, and which can make a difference in reaching the so-called carbon neutrality. And we will soon publish the final version of this market studies. And to conclude my 5 minutes, I would say that competition agencies should be vocal in highlighting to decision makers the importance of competition-friendly green public policies. It is also important to raise awareness among firms regarding the assessment that needs to be done when establishing sustainability agreements with competitors. And this is all from my side. Back to you, Andrea. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nuno. I think you put an interesting perspective, especially of how to address it, not just with guidelines and market studies, but also on coordinating and taking action or issuing opinion about other government proposals and other policy proposals that might have competition issues as well. So thank you for your opening statements. Next, we have Fabrizio Cardim from Brazil. Fabrizio, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Andrea. I would like to start by saying how important the topic on competition and sustainability is for the global agenda, and particularly to Brazil, and then provide a few examples of legislation in place and enforcement actions taken by CADE, which contribute to foster the promote sustainability goals while preserving the concerns over competition in the marketplace. As you are probably aware, Brazil has 58% of its continental territory covered by forest. Brazil contains the Earth's largest area of tropical rainforest. 2/3 of the whole Amazon forest is in its territory, and the Amazon forest itself is home to 10% of all plant and animal species known on the earth, as it's considered the most biodiverse place in the world. With a population of over 200 million people and as the 8th largest economy in the world, any efforts to develop Brazil has to be balanced to promote growth while preserving the environment and free market and competition, which I'll call here sustainable growth. That is why the Brazilian Federal Constitution, in its Article 170, refers both to free competition and environment protection as equally important, among other social values. Article 1 of the Brazilian Competition Act also sets forth the economic order shall be guided by constitutional principles of free competition, freedom of initiative, social role of property, consumer protection, and prevention of abuse of economic power. These are all principles of economic order in place in Brazil, which shall be balanced to promote sustainable growth. Once settled the ESG and competition legal framework in Brazil, I would like to give two examples of enforcement actions taken by CADE and one specific legislation passed by the Brazilian Congress, which illustrate these ideas above. The first case in 2008, CADE has unanimously approved, upon the execution of a merger control agreement, the constitution of Campo Limpo, a joint venture created by 32 largest manufacturers of crop protection products in Brazil to operate in the recycling and transformation of plastics from the packaging used by the industry. Through this merger control agreement executed with CADE, the company committed itself to adopt several behavioral remedies. In 2010, the Brazil National Congress approved the so-called National Solid Waste Policy, which, among other provisions, established direct or indirect responsibility of all agents in the chain for the generation of solid waste. The law also provides for the possibility of sectorial agreements, which are acts of a contractual nature signed between government and manufacturers, importers, distributors, and traders, sometimes even direct competitors, with a view to implementing the shared responsibility of the product life cycle. For last year, CADE's tribunal approved, without restrictions, the formation of joint venture to develop and operate a software to standardize sustainability measure in the food and agriculture supply chain in Brazil. According to CADE, the possible exchange of competitively sensitive information belonging to platform users and the joint venture partners themselves raise competition concerns. However, the risks of using such information to obtain competitive advantages were mitigated due to the commitments set forth by the companies through contractual instruments and guidelines to comply with competition laws. Those examples illustrate how enforcement actions taken by the antitrust authorities, as well as legislative initiatives by Congress, can balance competition and environmental goals among other social values in order to promote sustainable growth. Whenever competition and sustainability can be equally preserved, that should be the decision by the antitrust authorities. Of course, there might be also hard cases where different principles may clash against each other. On those circumstances, it might not be a good idea for antitrust authorities to take the decision to promote other goals instead of the consumer welfare, as they might not have all the necessary tools to make such a balanced decision. On such cases, courts, the executive and or legislative branches, depending on the circumstances on the case, might be called to act if they have the right tools to balance and take a more motivated decision than the antitrust authorities. I'll stop it here now, but I'll be available for the follow-up questions. Thank you, Chair Andrea.
Fabrizio, I think an interesting point that hasn't been raised out is merger analysis. So I find those examples very, very useful. And then for this first round, last but definitely not least, we have Commissioner Elisabetta Llosa. Elisabetta, please.
Thank you, Andreas, and thank you to the French Authority and the ICN for the kind invitation. I'm really happy to share the experience of the Italian Antitrust Authority, Autorità Garante della Concorrenza del Mercato, on these issues. And I think I would like, first of all, as an economist, to sort of think of a theoretical perspective. So theoretically, the relationship between competition and sustainability can be either one of substitutability, so a kind of conflict, the more competition, the less sustainability, and vice versa, or one of complementarities, where you promote competition and by doing so, you incentivize and promote sustainability. I think the experience of the Italian Antitrust Authority, which, as you know, is extremely active and does a lot of cases all the time, is mainly one of complementarities. I have prepared these slides, which shows how over the years, and the slides is just the recent years, we have really used all our tools to look very carefully at issues and markets where sustainability was a relevant aspect. And by using all the tools, I think we have given an important contribution to sustainability. Because by promoting competition, you can achieve more sustainable markets, incentivizing firms to invest in new technologies, ensuring that the new products and services are offered on the market at prices that reflect consumers, and ensure that the direction of the innovation in terms of technologies is the one that benefits consumers and society as a whole. So the slide here is a slide to me that makes it very clear how we really have a lot of tools available. I think it's great that the Commission and the member states in Europe have endowed themselves with the horizontal guidelines, dedicating a section on sustainability agreements, providing guidance, clarity, and explaining how to tackle sustainability issues when there is a conflict between sustainability and competition. At the same time, I really believe that there is a lot we are doing and we can continue to do in exploiting the complementarities. So very briefly, for example, in our antitrust cases, we have addressed sustainability by focusing a lot of our attention on key sectors for a sustainable economy. We've had a number of cases on the circular economy and in particular on the waste management sector. And again, this is a very important sector because if you can, sorry, not waste management, waste recycling. If you can recycling waste effectively, then you can ensure that producers will pay lower environmental contributions and users will pay lower prices thanks to the pass-through of these cost savings, and at the same time that there are incentives for new entrants to come and provide technologies which make the process more and more sustainable so that products overall will be more sustainable. So we've had a number of cases which saw the involvement of the consortia that were in charge of managing this recycling process. And by intervening, we've helped a liberalization process that in Italy took place around 2005 in various markets, so as to ensure that this sector will work better and better. But we have also intervened in the e-mobility sector by doing two cases at the moment, one which is a margin squeeze case and the other is a leveraging case, so exclusionary abuse by incumbent dominant firms. We have also 3 excessive pricing cases in again a key sector for sustainability, which is district heating, when the heat is produced by renewable or waste, as this is a cleaner source of energy. And we're looking at whether the pricing formulas, which are instead based on gas prices, are generating excessive pricing. We also have an ongoing case on bioplastic, which sees a firm signing a number of exclusive agreements with producers and distributors and retailers. At the same time, we've had also the possibility to take into account sustainability issues in our merger control. I think the Commission in a competition policy brief made it very clear, something we sort of agree with upon completely, and that is that we already have a number of instruments in merger control to take into account sustainability. As sustainability is simply another non-price parameter, and we can take it into account when we define markets, when we look at the competition among firms in the market, the barriers to entry, when we receive efficiency defense by firms, and when we submit remedies. And in fact, the authority also has a new power, which is a call-in power for mergers below thresholds, which allows us to ask companies to notify a merger, even if the merger does not meet both thresholds for the compulsory notification. And I mentioned this calling power because, again, this is a power which we can use by directing our attention or being very careful when there is a merger below threshold that might have implications on sustainability. In one of the mergers I mentioned here, we analyzed, looking at demand and supply side characteristics, whether, for example, a household green product was, at that time, we're talking about 2022, a product in the same market as the traditional product. At that time, we concluded that it was not, but it's clear that as preference of consumers evolve, we may find more and more that markets will be defined more narrowly, with greener products standing on their own. Let me, before concluding, just mention something which we see as we are an authority that also can run consumer protection cases, sanction firms, or accept commitments. And we do more than 80 cases a year. And I think consumer protection, again, is another complementary tool that we must use and we use. The reason being that in order to achieve sustainability, you need to induce firms to invest in sustainable products, in sustainable processes, and communicate this to firms so as to get, in a sense, a return in terms of more sales. But that communication needs to be truthful. If firms engage in green claims and they can mislead consumers, there is going to be inevitably a lack of trust from consumers, which may slow down this process where consumers are showing increasingly willingness to pay for green products. And in turn, this is going to weaken the incentives for firms to invest in new technologies and in new sustainable products. So the authority over the years has tackled green claims in a number of cases, and he also tackled, which is very relevant also now that we're talking about finally right to repair and early obsolescence, the issue of early obsolescence in some of its cases back in 2018. Not all these cases were confirmed in court, but again, we continue to try to push boundaries using all our tools to give a contribution also on sustainability, setting priorities in the sense of really looking very carefully at markets where sustainability is an important non-price parameter. And I think this is an important way forward.
Thank you, Elisabetta. I think it's an interesting point to see as a competition and consumer protection agency how those issues can merge, and also thank you for the comprehensive approach or the overview of how the Italian competition has approached it. I will now continue with you for the questions. As we have seen from your opening remarks, and as we have also read, the Italian Competition Authority has actually addressed quite a lot sustainability in several cases, and in fact, as far as I understand, sustainability is listed as one of its main action lines in its latest annual report. Highlighting the close complementarity between competition and environmental protection. Can you please tell us a little bit more about those cases and the approach that the Commission has followed to take into account these issues?
Right. Yes. So as I mentioned, for example, let me talk about mergers. In this merger involved a green product. We looked at the market definition to try to assess whether there was a separate market for the green product. So we, through surveys, we looked at the substitutability between the green product and traditional product, so as to make assessment on demand side effects, demand side characteristics. And also we looked at the supply side characteristic of the market, where, for example, at that time we found that they were using traditional products and green products were using exactly the same production plants. So at that time, we concluded that they were not separate markets. But as I mentioned, it's a non-price assessment which we can do, and I think over the next few months we may see other mergers where the markets instead might be defined more narrowly, precisely because consumer preferences are evolving and the willingness to pay for consumers, which is the driver, the pull factor in all this, will be higher. Perhaps, therefore, we might be able to identify markets for sustainable products or green products more than we can do now. In terms of antitrust cases, Andreas, these were standard antitrust cases. The issues we looked were like exclusionary abuses, rising rival costs, exclusive dealing, abuse of rights as exclusionary abuses, or exploitative abuses like excessive pricing. So it was the day-to-day business. But it's clear that if the markets which is offering a product or is recycling products, that gives an important contribution to sustainability. And I think Nuno and Raiko made this point very clearly when they talked about EV recharging, then your day-to-day action can have an important impact. And in fact, I'm pleased to see that we're all looking at recharging of an electric vehicle. They're doing it as advocacy. We are doing it as cases. But I think all the instruments, all the tools should be used, placing particular attention when the market is relevant to sustainability. But otherwise, it's just a business as usual. Although it is not as usual, the fact that we place a lot of attention, as you mentioned, sustainability is one of the things we report upon in our annual reports to the Parliament, as we place a lot of attention to markets or products which have positive implications on sustainability.
Thank you, Elisabetta. I'm afraid we have to change a little bit the order that in which we were agree, because I think Patrick has a little logistics problem. So Patrick, I will start the second question. The second question will now go to you. You mentioned something. You gave us an introduction of what's been happening in the Swiss authority, but the Swiss Competition Commission has publicly advocated for sustainable solutions that comply with competition rules, such as the case of the review of, the Swiss Bankers Association ESG documents in March 2023. This is just something that I was reading and I found quite interesting. But from your perspective, how can competition law complement traditional environmental protection law to enable economic self-regulation? Can you maybe provide us with an example of where this approach has been successful?
Yeah, thank you very much for you giving me the floor. I'm sorry, I'm at the airport and I scheduled that we have our workshop until 3:15. And so what can competition agency, what can they do in worldwide? I say it's as the chairwoman of the Italian competition agency said in a very clear way. I guess it's a combination of advocacy on the one hand side and ex ante guidance, which this could be the most fruitful way of work right now before having clear case laws in Europe and in Switzerland. And such a mix of advocacy and other tools could eliminate some fears of the economy of private sector regarding sustainability initiatives and so on. So such guidelines by competition authorities can help undertakings to evaluate a little bit the planned initiatives and to assess the legal risks. Just give me just an example of one case we had recently. It's an undertaking in dominating the market, and they wanted to implement a bonus-malus system regarding requirement of sustainability, and they wanted to reward business partners if they cause less emissions by using e-transportation compared to the traditional way of transporting. And at the very end, when the agency is telling you, yes, we need to have a clearer look, what are the anti-competitive effects of this? Is yes, we see the pro-competitive effects, and I guess with the kind of, and this was what was told the company, and at the very end, the company said, no, the risk is too great. We don't want, as a dominating company dominating the market, we are not going to make the first step. We leave it to the governments deciding what they want as a minimal requirement. So, and the other example, which is known by all my panelists today, the United Nations Initiative Net Zero Insurance Alliance, where several insurance companies aim to go beyond minimal standards collectively, but at the very end, couple of states in the United States, they filed a claim and saying it's an anti-competitive initiative, and then the one after the other insurance just left these initiatives. I guess, as the chairwoman said, I guess it's basically advocacy, taking away the fear and promoting that the willingness of a competition authority to really have an open approach to such initiatives, and not to say if you are not sure. If you are not sure about what you do, just drop it. I guess the competition authority and advocating should say, do it. And if there is no clear violation, and obviously large companies make a proper assessment, if there are no clear violation, or if there are if there are any doubts, we are not going to punish you afterwards if you have a little bit of doubts about the weighing anti-competitive effects on the one hand side and sustainability effects on the other hand side. Because this is what the private sector would like to happen.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for giving us the perspective of the private sector. We hope you have a safe flight, and we're sorry for running a little bit out of time. Thank you. And now going about to our original programming, Fabrizio, you mentioned in your first intervention some quite interesting cases regarding merger review or joint ventures that can touch upon the intersection between competition and sustainability. Can you please tell us a little bit more? You mentioned the Campolino case, which was a collaboration between competitors in the agrochemical sector. Can you tell us a little bit more about this precedent, and are there any lessons for other jurisdictions that we should take from this experience?
Sure, thank you, Chair Andrea. So as I mentioned before, the Campolino case established the CADE's first precedent regarding collaboration between competitors for the adoption of joint measures in favor of sustainability and environmental protection in Brazil. Throughout the merger review of the case, the antitrust authorities in Brazil raised concerns on the merger based on the fact that 4 out of the 32 shareholders at Campolino, namely they were Bayer, Syngenta, Millennia, and BASF in Brazil, they would control the company, and together they held 49% of the national market of crop protection products in Brazil. So according to that view, there would be an increase in the coordination incentives between these companies. However, CADE's tribunal, in its final decision, considered that the minority shareholders of the company would have sufficient defensive mechanisms protected by corporate laws in Brazil to control any abuse of power by these main shareholders of the company. In addition, CADE's tribunal considered also that the corporate governance set by the Campolino company, including the implementation of a compliance program as set in the merger control agreement, was robust enough to mitigate the competitive concerns that were identified during the merger review. When I was working for the merging parties on that case, I remember many of the shareholders saying that the deal was being made exclusively to protect the environment and never to violate antitrust laws. And for that reason, they were really open to take any commitments that CADE deemed necessary at the time. Fortunately, for the reasons explained before, we were able to convince CADE that all the corporate governance created at the company was good enough. This was a case in which one could clearly see that all stakeholders, shareholders, the agency, the antitrust agents, lawyers, consultants were all working hard to make the deal happen due to its social and environmental impact, and willing to take any measures necessary to preserve competition conditions in the markets involved. I think this is a key and important lesson that other jurisdictions could learn from this experience. And after this precedent, there were several other joint ventures or even sectoral agreements under the National Solid Waste Policy in Brazil, which were scrutinized by CADE under the same legal framework. I think they all influence subsequently sustainability-focused initiatives in Brazil. Thank you, Chair Andrea.
Thank you, Fabricio, and thank you for giving us more detail on this interesting case. And now I will go back to Nuno. Nuno, you mentioned in your first intervention the recently submitted best practices on sustainability agreements guide to public consultation, which, as you mentioned, competition is seen as an essential tool for incentivizing companies to promote more sustainable products or production processes. You also mentioned the work that you're doing on electric mobility. Could you please elaborate a little bit more on that, and also how did the ADC identify and engage with relevant stakeholders, and how have the recommendations been received by them?
Yeah, thank you, Andre, for the question. The ADC's recent public consultation into the market study on competition in the electric vehicles recharging sector was our most participated public consultation. So in addition to the opinion that came from the energy regulator, ERS, we received 183 contributions from different types of stakeholders. So this participation illustrates the high level of interest in this sector. Indeed, sales of electrical vehicles in Portugal continues to rise. In the first quarter of 2024, electric vehicles represented around 28% of the total sales. And so we need to make sure that there are no unnecessary barriers that limit a swifter adoption of this technology by the consumer. So one of the barriers that was identified by the ADC studies is the difficulty users have in making payments and comparing prices in charging of electrical vehicles. These difficulties were also signaled by various consumers and associations that took part in the public consultation. In fact, in Portugal, users have a contractual relationship with the retailers of electricity for electric mobility, and that limits the ability to compete for users of charging point operators. So accordingly, in this study, the ADC recommended speeding up the process of implementing ad hoc recharging. This system would allow consumers to pay in an easier way without having to sign a prior contract with the electric mobility supplier, while ensuring greater price transparency. These difficulties are also associated with the complexity of the Portuguese organization model, which is quite unique in Europe. So while the Portuguese model presents advantages, such as interoperability, given that all electric vehicle users can recharge their car in any charging station, it comes at the cost of complexity for the system and users. So the implementation of ad hoc recharging will be an important way to make the sector more attractive and simpler while maintaining interoperability. For charging point operators to be able to offer a range of varied offers directly to consumers and with incentives for innovation, it will be important also to follow closely the European model, where it is possible to choose the supplier on and ad hoc basis, similar to the way gas stations operate. This was, in fact, the most debated recommendation in the public consultation. And in our view, it will bring the Portuguese model closer to the predominant model at European level, because we all know that the European model is established in the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation concerning recharging stations, with the consumer benefiting from the advantage of a greater variety of offers. Still, as the European regulation has a phased implementation period, the ADC is recommending its application as soon as possible. Another barrier we have identified relates to the legislative framework in force, which has made it possible to extend the scope of sub-concession contracts for motorway service or refueling areas in order to cover also the installation and operation of charging points. Knowing this, we recommended that at the term of these contracts, there should be separate public tenders just for the installation and operation of charging points on motorways, differently from refueling areas, in order to open up those markets to competition. Our recommendation is aimed at the future contracts and will likely boost competition in motorways. The majority of the respondents did not raise specific issues in this regard. But it is not sufficient to have an innovative, competitive, and efficient network. It is also necessary to ensure that charging infrastructure is available throughout the country, where consumers need it. To do this, we need to mitigate the geographical asymmetries in network coverage. And here, municipalities have a very important role to play. And this was another recommendation from the ADC that was generally well received, emphasizing the importance of intermunicipal mechanisms that make the entry of operators simpler and clearer. These were just some of our recommendations, and the feedback we received from the public consultation was very good. And we will publish in the short term the final version of the study. So back to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Nuno. I think we're looking forward to reading to the final version of the study. And now we will wrap up the last question with Commissioner Réseau. Commissioner Aoki, the JFTC, as you mentioned already, has been very active on the sustainability front, from issuing guidelines to market studies and already reviewing your guidelines. Can you please give us some insights from the JFTC's experience with the green guidelines and the market study on EV related cases? And maybe you can tell us a little bit of how these initiatives have influenced the JFTC approach to sustainability and competition policy.
Thank you, Andrea, for the question. As you said, JFTC's experience on our green guidelines and EV market study has highlighted to us, we have learned, in other words, that identifying and understanding the real needs of businesses is very important. And to this end, engaging in constant dialogue with business and trade association was critical. For the green guidelines, as a result of the dialogue with the businesses, we revised it in a very prompt manner, as I already mentioned, and we also increased the number of hypothetical cases from 76 to 84. And this was appreciated by the Japanese business community immensely. And for the market study on EV-related markets, it was also important and the real market conditions, which was possible only by talking to the businesses involved. I was listening to Nuno's answer to your question just now about the EV markets and realized how the market is different from what the Japanese market looks like, although some of the problems like method of payment and long-term contracts is the same. And I also learned from Elizabeth that there's an ongoing case against EV charging stations in Italy. And I'm quite sure that gas stations, petroleum refueling stations in all three countries are very, very similar. But the EV market, charging markets are very, because the technologies are still developing and the market structure is still developing, including the supply of charging stations. And in order to understand what's going on, it really is important to listen to the stakeholders to understand their real needs as well. And this is not a trivial matter. It's easier said than done, precisely because the technology and the market is still evolving. And this is something that we learned, JFTC learned from its own experience of publishing guidelines and market studies, and also from this workshop. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiko, for your very, I would say, precise comments, and at the same time brief, because we are running a little bit late and out of time. I would again like to thank you all for your participation. I think this panel managed to give again a comprehensive approach from guidelines or advocacy point of view to market studies to JVs and merger analysis, and also include the perspective from the private sector, which as I think Reiko pointed out, it is key to listen to all of the stakeholders. So I will wrap it up given that we are running actually quite late, and thank all of you. Thank the ICN and again, thank the Autorité of the Concurrence for organizing this panel. I will now pass the floor to the chair of the ICN, to Andreas Mundt, who will give us some closing remarks. Thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. A warm welcome for the final speech today. First of all, of course, I would like to thank Benoit and the Autorité for organizing this great event on sustainability, this great workshop. We have seen two great panels, and we have learned a lot about how competition agencies worldwide and legislators, by the way, are dealing with this topic with regard to competition law. The topic remains important, and we should not have any false conclusions from the fact that the topic maybe is a little bit less in the public eye today. The outcoming EU Commission has been focused on sustainability. Olivier said a lot about that already with regard to the Green Deal. The new period, the new Commission will focus on competitiveness, but I firmly believe that this shift of focus does not mean that the topic is off the agenda. We see this environmental changes around the world. The US Finance Ministry called in an emergency meeting last week, together with development banks from the Americas, from Asia, from Africa and Europe, it was truly global, to discuss the devastating heat waves in many parts of the world, especially in poor ones, but also others. To provide financial resources to these countries to protect people from the heat, to adjust to the heat, and to reduce the damage that is done by the heat. There are heat waves from the east coast of the US to India, and it is not only that this issue is not going away, it is becoming increasingly important in all policy areas, and of course it is also becoming more important in the area of competition law and policy. And this is why we really need to deal with the topic at the global scale in the ICN. This is by no means the first session that we have in the ICN on sustainability. And we are by far not the only international organization that is dealing with that topic. UNCTAD is active. It has published the report, Competition and Consumer Protection Policies for Sustainability in 2023. And also the OECD is dealing with it in roundtables, in hearings, in papers from 2020 until today. Ori has reported on that. And we in the ICN, we've been dealing with the topic since 2021. We did a survey and a report on environmental sustainability and competition policy led by our Hungarian colleagues for the annual conference in 2021. We had an head of agency session in the ICN conference in Barcelona in 2023, which led exactly to the workshop that Benoit and his team are hosting today. And I think it is so important that we deal with it, because one thing is for certain: achieving sustainable development that is really protecting the planet we live on requires a global effort. No country can do that alone. I would say, I would go further, not even a continent can do this alone. And this is maybe why the ICN, with its 140 members, is prone to deal with the question of sustainability. With all our eyes on sustainability, we must not lose out of sight also to enforce competition. It must go hand in hand. And I think this is the key message from the event we're in today. First, competition does not only not stand in the way of sustainability. I think effective competition is the key part of the solution, because sustainability needs and requires innovation. It cannot be achieved without it, and innovation only emerges from competitive environment. The second factor is, it is not just price or quality that matters to consumers, it's also more and more sustainability. Sustainability is something that consumers want. And more consumers are willing to pay a premium for that. And this development, that there is a certain willingness to pay and to change among consumers, it may be too slow, it may be not far-reaching enough. For many consumers, the premium should be low. It is not everyone who's paying for everything, but things have started to change. So sustainability is moving into a competition parameter, and we have to take account of it in our daily work. So where does sustainability play a role in our day-to-day cases? In fact, in all areas. Look at merger control, maybe the most difficult area where to include sustainability in our assessment. But I remember the takeover of Monsanto by Bayer in 2018. I myself was at a hearing then in German Parliament on that case. The European Commission had considered the potential impact of a possible reduction in competition on environmental protection and the climate. But the Commission also had stated by then, I quote, "Other concerns raised by petitioners relate to European and national rules to protect food safety, consumers, the environment, and the climate. While these concerns are of great importance, they cannot be the basis of our merger assessment." I still do believe to a certain point this is still state of the art. I personally believe that sustainability is not easy to include in merger assessment, because this is exactly about the increase of market power and thus on competition issues. There is room for environmental efficiencies, maybe to a certain extent, and I think to which extent will still be the subject of further studies. Sustainability, and that has become also clear today in our event, plays a greater role in the assessment of corporations. Indeed, green agreements need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. There are many ways to reach the goal. At the EU level, the Commission applies Article 101(3). Sustainability is part of the horizontal guidelines of DG Comp. There is a new soft harbor. It works with criteria like openness, non-discrimination, no exchange of sensitive information, no significant price increase, criteria that have been applied by the Bundeskartellamt and many other competition agencies worldwide since a long time. The EU is taking an approach that looks at efficiencies at different layers. They are the classical in-market efficiencies. Consumers get better and cheaper products. They look at the higher willingness to pay as consumers get more sustainable products. And it looks at collective benefits, so to say, a new type of out-of-market efficiencies decoupled from individual products. Consumers only profit as a larger part of the group. There has been a strong call today by many I heard during the panels that companies need guidance by competition agencies. We at the Bundeskartellamt, we do not have guidelines yet, but what we do is we give advice to companies coming in, asking us, is this project in line with competition law because I want to set up something that is promoting sustainability? We give exact advice to these companies. So I can only call on everyone who wants to talk to us in Germany. Please come in. We give you advice if you can do certain projects with regard to establish sustainability. Secondly, we have had many cases in Germany. Maybe we have had many. Let's leave it to that. You can read about them in press releases. You can read about them in case reports. We are very active in advocating that sustainability is a part of our assessment to a certain degree. And we try to promote and to make advocacy for companies that we are very much willing to give guidelines in individual cases. There have been no formal exemptions that have been granted so far based on efficiencies, but we do a thorough review within our discretion if or not we want to take up a case or not. And thus we try to provide guidance in individual cases based on deliberations that are very similar to the horizontal guidelines of the European Commission. The key case in Germany, just to give an example, was an initiative on animal welfare. It was an alliance of agriculture companies, the meat industry, and food retailers. The goal was to reward companies for improving animal welfare, and the core element was a payment of a uniform price premium per kilogram of meat sold, the so-called animal welfare fee. You see, all market participants had to pay an additional fee. So if you look at it at first glance, it looks very much like a very broad cartel agreement, and to a certain extent it is. But it has been tolerated by the Bundeskartellamt for over 10 years, despite our competition concerns, and it was necessary in our assessment to design a future competitive financing model also in order to achieve sufficient market coverage. Which was, and that is the good and excellent message about this case, which was finally accomplished, and therefore the mandatory price surcharge was given up at the end of 2023, an excellent example for avoiding a first mover disadvantage. Another case example was the agricultural policy project Dialogue on Milk. Here, farmers, dairies, and food retailers came to us and asked for advice because they had agreed to pay premiums on the price charged by raw milk producers. The aim was to generate a higher income to invest more in sustainability. In that case, the agreement was rejected by the Bundeskartellamt. For us, it was too vague, too opaque. There was no guarantee that there was really a link between a higher income and a higher green investment. And we even raised here the question of greenwashing. So what you see from the two cases, competition law works. Meaningful and truly sustainable projects are feasible, and we are able to differentiate them projects of which we think they might lie in the line of greenwashing. What now comes on top of the EU, there are some new regulations in the agriculture area that hasn't developed its full force yet. There is a new regulation in the Common Market Organization of Agriculture Products, a blanket exception from Article 101 for producers of agriculture products for agreements that are indispensable to meet certain sustainability standards like environmental protection, animal welfare, or the reduction of pesticides. The consumer is not mentioned in this regulation. The competition is not mentioned in this regulation. It's in stark contrast of Article 101, and it allows for agreements, hardcore agreements in our sense, and we will see where this will take that. So to conclude, I would like to emphasize again, it is very important that we continue to deal with sustainability, that we deepen the international dialogue on this, because we have complex questions at hand in some cases, and I think it's best to deal with them together in order also to make sure that we do not have what I think Olivier has alluded to, a mismatch of ideas, of approaches, of cases, and that it is not clear for companies what they really can do in the name of sustainability and what they should not do. And secondly, very important, we must leave room for competition. We have the innovation we need, for that is sustainability. Thank you very much, Benoit. Thank you again to you and your team, and thanks for having me today.